Welcome along. Off the ball coming at you on a Wednesday evening. There is honestly something of a fiasco feel about the Conor Benn Chris Eubank Jr. fights. So this morning we had a revelation of an adverse drugs test to boost testosterone.
Adverse.
Yeah, adverse. British Boxing Board of Control came out and said, well, clearly we're going to have to prohibit this fight going ahead. It seems it's happening anyway for reasons we'll get into. Gavin Casey of the 42 is going to join us this hour, but very, very odd to say the least. A developing story, so Gav's with us live at 7:30. Wednesday night rugby, Keith Wood, Rory O'Connor on the way, and then Mr. Gavin Cooney will be along for the football show. Champions League evening is in progress. 53106, the text number. We're at Off the Ball on Twitter. Michael McCarthy here in the studio. Hello.
Hi, Joe.
And Richie McCormack. Hello to you.
Evening, gents.
So I mentioned Keith Wood, Rory O'Connor coming your way, 8 o'clock. I suspect I'm stealing your thunder, Richie, from the Newsround, but certainly...
Hugely, Joe, as ever.
Just to mention, because a shocking story, really. It's on the front pages of quite a few papers, not just sports sections. So the word from this latest study published yesterday in the Journal of Neurology, Neurosurgery and Psychiatry is that rugby players of an international standard, certainly, 15 times more likely to develop motor neuron disease versus the general population. Position on the pitch, interestingly, made no impact on the risk, and this was from Willie Stewart, University of Glasgow, a man who's been working in this department in this area for a long time, has done studies into football and rugby. So in effect what he did was compared 412 male former Scottish internationals, it's very much a Scottish study, University of Glasgow, 412 male former Scottish internationals versus 1,200 of the general populace. And Stewart has been doing interviews right across the board today. I mean, TalkSport, for instance, who don't usually pay too much heed to rugby union, had Stewart on, and he said the numbers were a big surprise to him. And the report, in effect, sounds the klaxon. It only has so many answers here. What it said was, this finding requires immediate research attention. So in other words, this has surprised us. This is incredibly worrying. We need to get the hell into this very quickly with more research and find out why is this happening, what is the root cause of this. And I suppose, Mick, lots of people straight away on hearing that news would think of Dottie Weir, for instance, but for anybody involved in the game, it's another terrifying story.
This is it, isn't it? It just, these things just keep happening. And look, I'm not questioning the results, but I have questions about it. For example, like how many people in the general public do get motor neurons disease. Therefore, like, while 412 is a huge sample size for this, if that is 2 results, then, you know, that's possibly an outlier. But I think the problem with that is you get into twice as likely to get dementia, 3 times as likely to get Parkinson's disease. Regardless of whether it's 15 times or not, you know, maybe that's an outlier, but we know here that there's a trend. And it's so worrying. You're talking about all these serious brain injuries, and the common cause seems to be rugby. And what can you do about that, Joe? Like, I mean, we'll have this discussion on Wednesday at Rugby in much more detail, and we'll have it for a long, long time. And we'll talk about making the game safer, and we'll talk about everything. But you're talking about, like, do you want your kids playing this game at the moment? And it's I hate being a no on that answer, because there's so much more to sport than the long-term consequences and so on that may or may not be there. But it's so hard to ignore. It's so hard to ignore. Where does a sport where you have results like this from a study stand? It's so hard to know, isn't it?
I mean, they can only make the game so safe. Willie Stewart mentioned 2 things. He said contact training has to be a thing of the past. And Peter O'Reilly had a great piece in the Sunday Times a couple of weeks ago where he spent the week with Leinster training. And in effect, they have no contact training. I think 15 minutes, and not even in one concurrent spell of 15 minutes. As Stuart Lancaster said, effectively, we train at level 2, which is non-contact, and rarely get to level 3.
And so kind of said they didn't miss it, didn't he? Like, as in they found a way around that there isn't, it's not a big deal anymore,
So that was one, and that should be implementable across the board very, very quickly, if not everywhere already. And then number 2, Willie Stewart said, and this is the trickier part, he said, fewer games. Way fewer games. He said, look at the number of matches being played is this credible that young men and women are playing week in, week out for the majority of the year just for entertainment? I know it's tough to think about there being less rugby rather than more, but ... So his perspective on all this talk of extending seasons and introducing new competitions was we need to hang on. He did have the, I suppose, chilling line: I'm genuinely concerned about what's happening in the modern game, and that if in 20 years' time we repeat this study, we would see something even more concerning. Now, it's hard to know because contact training and the training of 20 years ago was far more abrasive and less conscious of concussion than it is today in a massive way.
Yeah, but the game has become a lot more physical. The athletes have become more fine-tuned. Things like a head being down in the ruck, as Matt Williams was talking about last week, is like, was a shoeing all that bad when you think about it all these years on? There's a natural dichotomy, I think, between what the game needs financially and commercially. And that is more games and more play and more competition and more tours versus what is needed to possibly save it in the long term and for the safety of its players. And that's always just going to be in opposition to each other, unfortunately. But obviously not an expert here, but we've been talking about, again, I keep mentioning it, but you, Dr. Mickey Collins, in here talking about concussion, and one of the key findings that he has is getting a second concussion within a week or something. I think it was more than triples, isn't it? More than triples your recovery time.
Even playing 15 minutes after a concussion.
Yeah, sorry, that was it. So for playing on for 15 minutes rather than being removed immediately, more than triples your recovery time. How many undiagnosed, and I don't mean this by way of people not doing their job properly, but I'm guaranteed there are undiagnosed concussions in rugby all of the time, and that's because they're symptomless. Just a quick bang to the head, no symptoms, no anything, no reason for anybody to check it. I guarantee they're happening all the time, and these players are playing on. It is repetitive injury, and that's what's causing these things. Again, that's me saying this not as an expert. This is just common sense based on the results.
Sure. And so look, there's the financial health and safety threat, existential threat to the game, and then there's just participation and the mood music across Ireland, England and beyond. Steve Thompson has a documentary on BBC this evening. I mean, Rich, that can't be anything but harrowing, and that'll be watched by probably close to 1 million people. I don't know what BBC primetime gets these days, but it will be seen by the mainstream. And the more that rugby has whatever about the research that has to be done to establish how much fire there is, certainly there's a hell of a lot of smoke, and a lot of concerned parents will see the smoke and say, well, I'm not taking a chance, and that's the reality.
Yeah, even the quotes and the clips that have been seeded out from Steve Thompson's documentary, they're out there already online, are pretty chilling, to say that he feels like he can dip out of conversations in terms of he just completely loses track of what's happening, such has been the degeneration of his cognitive function. Allied to that, like on top of Dr. Stewart's survey, there was a survey put out by the Rugby Players Association in England last week, which said that 50% of those responding, so it was a survey of 180 players, 50% of those responding say they felt they had some kind of cognitive issue going on upstairs. And similarly, they said only 33% of those who did respond to saying that they have some kind of cognitive issue say that they've actually sought some treatment for it, or some kind of diagnosis of it. So it's a real concern, and rugby has a real issue on its hands here. When you tie that into the elongation of the game, like today's game, Emerging Ireland and the Pumas took 2 hours just short of. The first 40 minutes took an hour, and that's down to checking and all this kind of stuff. But that plays into having to check because there's so many different contacts going on, and these are human brains we're talking about here, and you're talking about a really severely decreased quality of life for potentially, as the studies have shown here, a real sizable chunk of those who choose to ply their trade in rugby. And that isn't a good look for a sport, to say that one of the main issues that you will have coming out of this is that there's a 50-50 chance that you're going to have some kind of brain issue. And I don't think any other profession besides boxing maybe, and obviously general professions, would have that. And that can only be tolerated for so long. How you go about changing, I know he said that there's different ways, means of changing it and making a difference, but in the long term and in a very real sense, I really don't know how rugby in its current form survives without radical overhauls to protect the mental well-being of players going forward.
Yeah, I know Rory O'Connor will make the point later on. Informed consent, as grim a thought as that is. NFL players, boxers, they understand the dangers. They go in with their eyes open. That may be just the only accommodation, but we'll come to that after 8 o'clock. Slightly heavy start to the show, I appreciate. We'll get into the news round. It is brought to you with Gillette Labs for an effortless finish to your day. So you're starting with the Champions League. It's ongoing.
Yeah, I'm watching Celtic fans here celebrate to my left because it looked like they had just gone 2-1 down away to RB Leipzig. 1-1 it remains. A VAR review has chalked off that second Leipzig goal. They took the lead, did the German side, through Christopher Nkunku in the first half. They'd also had a goal disallowed in that first half too. But Celtic leveled 3 minutes after the break through Jota, and it remains 1-1 with 25 minutes to go in that game. And in fact, Celtic,
2-1.
pardon me, Leipzig have just taken the lead. So it is 2-1 after all to the Bundesliga sides. So there you go.
Come on, Rich,
so much
keep
for my
up, will you?
yabbering.
That's the second. That's the second time that Leipzig have had a VAR goal, a goal allowed, then ruled out by VAR, and then scored a couple of minutes later in this game. Weird.
Rob Malahide says, wouldn't consider letting my kids play rugby, sadly, as many parts of the game are great for maturing, etc. Given the Stewart report's initial findings, is there a reasonable debate needed about suspending all adult rugby until recommendations are agreed? Horrific numbers. That's Rob Malahide. Owen says, if there was less URC rugby, would fans really care? The teams involved don't take it seriously. Six Nations, European rugby, the only important game, says Owen. I mean, thankfully here, certainly if you're at provincial level, I'm not as au fait, I must confess, with the Dragon setup or the Zebre setup, but certainly here, if you're playing for one of the provinces, you're probably quite well looked after in terms of numbers of games. And Willie Stewart might say, well, that's not a bad scenario in comparison with the Premiership, for instance, as our nearest neighbour, or the top 14, where it's week in, week out, your best 15 every week, game after game after game, and we see the financial pressures they're under. So maybe there might be some solace in that for Irish URC players, but not much.
It's funny, it's been a kind of a policy that's come under a little bit of fire in recent years, hasn't it? Like, as in, sometimes we're talking about players being undercooked and possibly not playing enough rugby. I think we see, that's the least of our worries at the moment. And maybe, I'm not sure that has been done for. It's been done for player welfare, don't get me wrong, but it's done to keep people fresh and able for the long season. But it could be protecting them in an awful lot more long-term ways as well,
Rich, I presume that emerging Ireland game finished eventually, did it? It did. Just to run you through elsewhere in the groups that are going on tonight, that was an Andre Silva goal that put Leipzig ahead. An 8 p.m. start to the group's other game, holders Real Madrid at home to Shakhtar Donetsk. Like Celtic, Chelsea are still searching for a first win of the campaign when they take on AC Milan at Stamford Bridge from 8. The group's other game had a 5:45 start in Austria, and Salzburg have taken the lead there at home to Dinamo Zagreb from the penalty spot. In Group G, from 8, Manchester City entertain Copenhagen. Pep Guardiola has made 5 changes to the side that started against Manchester United, but Erling Haaland continues up front, where he's partnered by Julian Alvarez as the first start of the season as well for Aymeric Laporte. And at the same time, Sevilla hosts Borussia Dortmund. And I did watch all this. Emerging Ireland made it 2 wins from 2 in their tour of South Africa. Leinster back row James Culhan, just 19 years of age, scored a pair of tries, put in a great performance as well. 28 points to 24 win over the Pumas in Bloemfontein. John Hodnett, was a late withdrawal from the game with a knee injury, but it is hoped that he can play in Sunday's tour closer against the Cheetahs.
Did see my cat make the point, if you think this Emerging Ireland tour is not worth the time of day, then just ask the players. And I suspect for the players it's a big deal, and in 5 years' time we'll be reading interviews of full Irish internationals saying that tour made a big difference in my life, my career. So it's easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I know it's very off Broadway from our perspective.
Okay, I would say there's 2 ways of looking at that. Treat it as that, and is in 5 years' time, does this experience going off on a tour with other emerging players matter? Is that a good thing? Do we talk about under 20 teams? Where are they now? Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. This was sold to us as preparation for the World Cup.
And he didn't tell me it was the Kieran Frawley tour.
You know what I mean? And we're even and that was even after most of the culls had been made. It was just for Kieran Frawley, who obviously pulled out before they went with injury. But we were talking about this as like, this is for bolters. This is for someone to look who's going to make it to the World Cup, and it's clearly not that. So fine, it exists. That's fine. Should that be happening at a time of the year when the provinces would be playing these players more so than when they will be later in the year when Heineken Cup comes around?
Andy Dunn's still calling it the Kieran Frawley tour. So of all of these games now, I think I can only put one on one TV screen and try and semi-host a radio show whilst doing it. I think by dint of Haaland, I'm sticking on
It's
City.
City versus Copenhagen,
think
but we
it's
could see 6 or 7 goals.
And I wouldn't have watched City versus Copenhagen last year, but this is the richness he provides to the Man City tapestry.
Yeah. It's a scary formation that City have gone with tonight. They're going with 4-2-4. So I think across the front, from right to left, they have Mahrez, Haaland, Alvarez, and Grealish then on the left, and 2 sitting in midfield. So at least that's how UEFA have listed it. But like, if that's the case, Mother of God, I really pray for Copenhagen.
No Foden or De Bruyne though.
Oh, well then, all right. That's only going to be 6 or 7.
What's the point? Yeah. No, geez, you make a fair point though, Joe. I have to say, I'm looking at that and going, what a terrible Champions League night.
Is it?
And I'm kind of looking at it sort of like going, oh, I'm not interested in any of those games. And Man City Copenhagen is the ultimate fixture of why the group stages aren't as great as they're made out to be, and of a tournament that becomes brilliant in February, right?
Okay.
But you've actually explained that to me in a way now. It's like, I kind of want to see this because this could be an absolute railroading.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it ends up being 2-0 though, I'm going to blame you personally.
That's fine. I accept that. What is there? Real Madrid, Shakhtar.
Chelsea, Milan would be good actually. Chelsea need a win there.
Yeah. PSG playing Benfica, Juventus, Maccabi Haifa. Yeah, it's fine. Champions League is fine this evening, I think is what we're saying.
It's better to exist than to not be there at all, maybe.
Indeed. So you have a clip. I mean, we don't need to go through all the details again, but you do have a clip. Willie Stewart speaking, Rich, do you?
Yeah, he was talking to Sky Sports today, was Dr. Stewart, the man behind that report at the University of Glasgow, and he was asked what changes he would make to the game to address the issues raised.
One is look at what's happening during the week and just say now contact training during the week. During the competitive season should be viewed as virtually a thing of the past. They should be really getting rid of it as much as possible. I think at the same time, though, they need to look at the number of matches that have been played and ask, is this credible that young men and women can be playing week in, week out for majority of the year just for entertainment? Is there a way that we could trim back on that exposure? There were changes made fairly rapidly in American football, which were pretty effective actually, including getting rid of contact training as much as possible during the season. I think it's virtually non-existent now. I think rugby could be speeding up this pace of change. I know it's tough to think about there being less rugby rather than more, but maybe less is more. Maybe you get a better quality products. You see better quality rugby. The players are less damaged and fitter rather than depending purely on quantity. So I think rugby has to think about it. You can't continue to put young men and women through what they're being put through. Now we know, even from the amateur era, there's this risk of degenerative brain disease.
FAI, Richie?
Yeah, they've come in for criticism for moving the final round of fixtures in the SSE Electricity Premier Division to the same day as the Women's FAI Cup final. Sunday, November 6th, we'll see all 5 top-flight matches kick off at 7 p.m, with current leader Shamrock Rovers away to UCD and Derry City, their nearest challengers, at home to Dundalk. The games were originally scheduled for the Friday before. Tallaght Stadium, meanwhile, is hosting the Women's FAI Cup final clash of Shelbourne and Athlone on that Sunday, and it will kick off at 3 p.m.
Not ideal. I guess it won't really affect TV audience for the women's final if that's at 3 and all the matches are at 7, but certainly any walk-up crowd to Tallaght Stadium, they might be going to a Shamrock Rovers game, especially if they potentially more than likely going to win the league. So you would think
the coverage for it beforehand
easily avoided. Well, if they're on Sunday, we'll go Saturday or move it around. It's not like this is a tricky one to sort out.
I really don't understand the need to move the games either, because final night in the Electricity League has always been on a Friday night,
right.
For the last God knows how many years.
So this is the first Sunday
that I can remember, certainly. Yeah. I know there have been Sunday finishes before, but this is the first one in a while, and it seems really late in the day and really close as well to the cup final to be making that call, and I'm struggling to understand why.
Well, also, I just top of my head, so you're about to win the league, you're a Shamrock Rovers fan. Do you want to win the league and celebrate on a Friday night or at 9:30 on Sunday? Why? Sunday night, we trek all the way home from, where are they playing? They're away, they're in UCD, so they're in Dublin, but still, everyone's got work in the morning.
It's been a while since I had a Sunday FA Cup final celebration as well. So they're not fun to recover from the next day, I can tell you that much. So, it just seems odd and really. just ignorant, I guess, of the need for the Women's Cup final to have its own space.
Yeah. Look, I mean, they're obviously been very progressive in many ways, so maybe there's a decent reason. We'll see if there's something to say about it. There might be some explanation we're not thinking about. The Galway women's football situation has been sorted out.
Yeah, they will be entering a side, Galway United, that is, in next year's Women's National League. Women's football in the region had been plunged into doubt, with Galway WFC announcing their intention to withdraw from the league at the end of this season. But United say they will have a senior women's and under-19s and under-17 team from next season.
Hi lads, my 10-year-old son playing rugby since he was 6. I help out with the coaching. The main focus is finding space, avoiding contact, getting the ball wide. All tackling for minis and junior is below the waist. Refs give penalties for higher tackles. Love the show, Ollie in Dublin. Great to hear that's happening now.
It is, yeah, of course it is. But obviously that eventually has to change. And then there's also quite, the heading in football debate is also, when they do start doing it, are they equipped for it and are they trained for it? I think in rugby, I think this is a more reasonable way of doing things, and then you gradually introduce higher contact and safe tackle technique and everything else. But
gets serious, obviously, at schools level in many areas.
Yeah, it gets very serious at schools level in many areas. Kind of come back to our conversation from last night. Perhaps it gets too serious at schools level in many areas.
Lads, I played rugby to a decent level. When I played, the other forwards like me were fat lads who ran away from each other. Of course there were hits. The backs were skinny runners. Now everyone's a 20-stone bodybuilder told to crash into everyone. MMA is safer, believe me, a disgruntled Cork man. I don't know if it's quite that bad at amateur level, but I'll bow to your experience.
It is a fair point that it's a different sport. It was about rugby. It was about finding space, and it wasn't about the collision. You even look at remember Rugby Gold used to be on TG Carter, and you would see, the scrums. They just kind of casually came together almost as a unit. Went in, scrum was over.
Yeah. Now
it's about the collision. It's a different sport, and it wasn't invented to be, 20 stone men running into each other at full pace.
There's no going back on that front now.
No, of course not. No.
So this is our 7:30 story. It is very interesting, Rich. The Benn Eubank Junior fight, I think, is going ahead as things stand.
Yeah, should mention, by the way, that people point out that Rovers are playing rightly in the Conference League on the Thursday before, so obviously that would force the fixtures back, but even still a bit late in the day to be making that call. They're away in Sweden on that Thursday.
But that's sort of fair enough then in ways. At least there's a motivation.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
Richie, should they just cancel the game altogether and not give Rovers the title? That would suit everybody.
I would be fully in favour of the season being cancelled from several months back. I'd say settle the FAI Cup from the quarter-final stage, roughly.
Far be it from me to defend the FAI, but okay, Rovers are playing Thursday. They do have to give them rest. So they're at least putting it on at 7. The women's final's at 3. Is it insulting to the women's final to say, actually, we're going to move you to Saturday? I do think it's a tricky enough spot for the FAI. They're doing their best on that one.
Two different events, different times of day. Does it massively take away? It's not as if it's being kicked out of the Aviva or anything.
No. I know we love a good FAI kicking, but you can sort of see a fairness maybe on that one. As for this Benn Eubank Junior fight, I'm struggling to see the fairness here, Richie.
It's bizarre. 3-1 Leipzig, by the way. Promoter Eddie Hearn is seeking a court injunction to allow Saturday's clash of Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn to go ahead. The British Boxing Board of Control insists the fight should be called off after Benn failed a drugs test. He tested positive for clomiphene, which is a women's fertility drug which can increase testosterone production if taken on a daily basis by men. It's since been reported that Benn's positive happened on September 23rd, nearly a fortnight ago, but was only made public this morning.
Yeah, so this is bizarre, obviously, at a glance. The issue is that, so September 23rd, you got more information than me on that front. I read it was somewhere in September, maybe even late August. So the issue is that as part of these fights now, the fighters tend to negotiate some kind of voluntary anti-doping protocol. So VADA, which is Voluntary Anti-Doping Association, they did the test. So the two fighters say, look, I don't want you on drugs, you don't want me on drugs. Let's have voluntary drugs test, grand shake on that. So VADA did the test on Benn. They found the fertility drug in his system, sample A. For reasons nobody can explain, they still haven't tested sample B, so it seems he's committed no violation until that's tested. Again, that is just nonsensical as to why it hasn't been tested. But then the other aspect is the British Boxing Board of Control, they rely on UCAD testing. So UK anti-doping do their tests, and they've done loads of tests over the last couple of days, and Benn's passed all of them. So technically there's a sense that, well, he's passed all the UCAD tests and he hasn't failed sample B of the voluntary ones. So through this cloud of protocol and technicalities, the fight's going ahead. Even though British Boxing Board of Control came out today and said, we prohibit this fight going ahead.
Yeah. So I don't know where that leaves it. But the Eddie Hearn, we're going to hear from him in a few minutes, right? He talks about Benn being tested this week, as in that being almost like more important than something that came before.
Yeah.
So he's like, hold on, he's done all the tests this week.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm sorry, I whatever about the Conor Benn story, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but it's basic doping knowledge to know that you're less likely to be, you're more likely to be, you're going to be tested on the week of a fight, so you're probably not going to test positive if you're doing it any way properly.
Yeah.
You know, it's when you're done a few weeks ago is when you might be actually caught. So the fact that Eddie Hearn is coming out and making a big deal about the fact that he's been tested this week many times and passed the test is so dishonest. It really is. And that's what annoys me about it. Whatever about this particular thing and whether the fight should go ahead, look, I think we know how we feel about it, but you know, there's nuance to it at least. But that particular thing is what annoyed me today. Yeah.
I mean, you can't overstate, in general terms, only an absolute moron gets pinged around an event.
Well, look, that's what we were saying earlier today off air, and that's exactly.
Yeah. Like, we just can't overstate that enough.
No.
In 2022, it's just not a thing anymore.
If you're a doper and you get caught on the week of an event, then you just don't know what you're doing.
No. So, the fact that it's been all good for the last couple of days doesn't really calm the sense that something's gone awry here. We should say, by the way, that the Benn camp, and Conor Benn, and we'll play his audio in a moment, is absolutely adamant that he's a clean athlete and they're going to get to the bottom of this, and there's something which has gone awry here, but absolutely nothing untoward has been taken. So that is very much the Benn camp, and he's spoken to Chris Eubank Jr., who's happy for the fight to go ahead. So like I said, we'll talk about it in a bit more detail in a few moments' time. I mean, geez, if the real issue in boxing, we're probably not talking about this enough. I know we aren't, because this is just like the most depressing sporting story in a long time.
Yeah, it's been a pretty grubby day for the sport. The International Boxing Association, formerly known as AIBA, of course, who look after the amateur end of it, is to lift its ban on Russian and Belarusian boxers competing at their events. Boxers from both countries were banned following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but the IBA say their fighters will be allowed to compete under their own flags, and their anthems will be played at events should they win medals. They say they want to be an apolitical organisation. IBA governance issues, of course, look set to rule boxing out of the LA Olympics in 2028.
I know people find this all a bit boring, so just give me 10 seconds of your attention, because, I mean, it's just so scandalous what's happening, and it's really going to come home to roost when boxing's not at the Los Angeles Games in 2028. International Boxing Association has been taken over by a Putin ally, Umar Kremlev. He's been voted in because they're doshing money around to all the many countries who have votes. A lot of the more established boxing countries have not voted for him. And Gazprom are the biggest sponsor. He's hanging out with Putin all the time. They have banned Ukrainian boxers. They're bringing in Russian and Belarus boxers fighting under the Russian flag. The Olympic Committee has said, well, you're not coming to the LA Games in 2028. And they've said, fine. Because, like, what's Putin's attitude to the Olympic Committee? I wouldn't say great after the last number of years. So, like,
Russians not going to games in LA wouldn't be unheard of.
No. There's a real chance that the next Kelly Harrington, all the Irish fighters, when they come of age in 4 or 5 years' time, won't have an Olympic Games to go to. And this is happening just in the last 10 days.
More than likely.
Yeah, more than likely.
You know, that's the way it's been reported now, and you know, we'll see what happens. A long time to go, but you know, you mentioned it, Joe, Gazprom. Like, I mean, that's like, there's a headline here: Gazprom sponsorship saved IBA from financial collapse.
Yeah. The Russians,
you know, this
out.
is what it's about, and it's nothing else. And the, like, whatever your take on it, I did burst out laughing at the idea that this is apolitical when it is the exact opposite.
That brings to a close one of the more downbeat news rounds, really. I think it's fair to say. We will get to more of your rugby texts a little bit later on. Michael, thanks for the time being.
Thanks, Joe.
Richie, thank you.
Nice and lads.